chips that picks up the nutrients. And if it's thick like that, it won't. And then you reduce those fine hair particles. And your phosphorus will react with your aluminum and your iron and become insoluble and get tied up. So some of these are a real issue down here. And we have to work with our blueberry crops down here, but we don't want to drop it too far. And Rick's favorite picture here
Mhm.
is that we need to balance our nutrients, which we do not have them in balance, and they can either work to help each other or work against each other. So that's really important that we balance those nutrients.
One of the things I really like about this slide is the picture that's missing. If you notice, there's no lowest plank on the barrel. And I'm really glad to see that. The lowest plank on the barrel, I think, is not forward looking and forward leaning. It's not necessarily what nutrient do I need to add to get things to happen. Sometimes it's a nutrient interaction that I need to take something away, and the lowest plank on the barrel doesn't address that. If I've got high potassium and low calcium, the answer necessarily isn't adding more calcium. It may be taking some potassium out of the equation so we're in better balance with the calcium. So that low plank on the barrel doesn't account for nutrient balances that we're trying to achieve. And fertility really is about getting those balances correct. And the Mulder's chart does that way better.
And we've talked about climate. We know that's only going to get worse. So we have to make our soils more resilient to that. And I'm going to show you some data that's showing us in the blueberry fields how we're doing that. So we started doing some research work in 2011, and we started adding more of these diagnostic tools like when are we taking up nutrients? And we started focusing on phosphorus. So we're going to talk a little bit about the foliar phosphorus trial we did back 2015 and 2017. Then the really important trial where we followed crop and sprout sap sampling program over 3 years. Then we expanded that to develop a foliar fertility program to be able to try to move that needle of where we were deficient. And then finally, I'm going to talk to you about the blueberry compost research trial we've been doing.
I can't believe this has been going on for 5 to 6 years plus.
Yes. And why did we focus on phosphorus? Well, first of all, phosphorus is so important to your blueberry plants for your root growth, your flower development, your blooming potential. It helps make your blueberry plants adapt to adverse conditions. And boy, we've been seeing those, improving nutrient uptake and better fruit quality. And then we also know we have extremely high aluminum in Atlantic Canada soils. Low pH, high aluminum. How is that tying up all our phosphorus, which we need desperately in our blueberry fields? And when we have low phosphorus, which the majority of our blueberry farmers have, 90% is tied up. And then we're also having a lot of iron tying that up. So that's why we started focusing on phosphorus. And when it's cold and wet in the spring and dry summers, phosphorus isn't taken up. It has a whole effect on our mycorrhizal relationship that we just talked about. And as we all know, we keep trying to move into these bare areas, and these fields become more drought susceptible. We have less of a root system because we can't get that phosphorus flow at that low pH. So what are we going to do? So what was happening is that a lot of 105210 was being sprayed and still is. So at that time in 2011, I kept saying, are you sure we're getting it into the plant? Are you sure? And farmers would say, yeah, Lise, I see a difference. But nobody ever did a strip in their field to actually see if they would see that difference or not. So those who know me know that I want to know more. And so in 2015 and 2016, we applied 105210 on a large scaled field project. I wanted to know, is the foliar P getting into the plant or is it just staying on the surface? And research indicated that the maximum phosphorus uptake occurred within 10 days of being sprayed. Well, in 2015, we did the tissue samples pre and post 10 days. Fields were split into two. Half was sprayed with 105210. We had no difference. No increase in phosphorus. As a matter of fact, 10 days later, the phosphorus had dropped. So we did it again in 2016, and we replicated that 2015 trial. No difference in the tissue sample, but this time we also took sap.
And we included both an orthophosphate and a
No, not yet.
polyphosphate.
Not yet,
Oh, not
Rick.
yet? Okay, my apologies. Go ahead.
Not yet. So we
Okay.
saw no increase in the tissue samples, as you can see here, pre and post, pre and post, pre and post. But we did see an increase in the SAP sample when we applied the 105210, but we never got to optimum. We're still too low, and it was a small increase. So then at that time, I started to work with Rick,
Mm.
and we thought, why don't we do small replicated trials and we compare the 105210 to the 924-3. And we sampled before we sprayed, we sampled 3 days after we sprayed, and 10 days after we sprayed. Rick, can you talk a little bit about the difference between the two?
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, we were looking at different forms of the same nutrient. It's like you've got urea and ammonium and nitrate. While on the phosphorus side of things, we've got what's called a polyphosphate, and then we have an orthophosphate. And we were looking at those different forms to compare them to see how each one penetrated the leaf and actually got in. Because as Lee said earlier, it's one thing to coat a leaf, but it's quite different, and it doesn't really help you any unless it gets into the plant. So we wanted to look at that. Both products were applied at the same amount of actual P2O5.
That's correct. So what was our results? Well, on the tissue, again, we saw no increase in 3 or 10 days for either foliar. And we also saw no increase at 3 or 10 days for nitrogen and potassium, because I thought if farmers were saying they saw a difference when they sprayed 105210, maybe it's the nitrogen, maybe it's the potassium, if it's not the phosphorus. Well, the tissue indicated it was neither one of those. The SAP did show an increase in the phosphorus levels in both of them, but we had a higher increase in the not, oh, it's 20, that should be 24, in the 924-3. We saw a significant increase in phosphorus above the 1052-10, but they were still below optimum. And in nitrogen, we also saw an increase in nitrogen as compared to 1052-10, but they were still below optimum, and the same for potassium. So overall, what we saw was improvement of the 924-3 getting into the blueberry plant when compared to the 1052-10, but we still weren't getting to optimum. So then here's the story. We just keep building. So then the next question is, well, why? Why weren't we seeing an increase? How much does a soil test impact the ability for the crop to take that in? Is it an imbalance in those fields? Is it timing? Did we put it at the wrong timing? And is it the application rate? Is the application rate too low? Because the application rate is really based on similar application rates in other crops. But if you think about the blueberry leaf, it's quite different than, say, a potato leaf. Potato leaf could really take a lot more in than a blueberry leaf is, because we have a thicker, waxier layer. So maybe that's part of the issue. And when does the blueberry plants take up these nutrients? Nobody had those results. And at that time with SAP testing, there were results in nutrient uptake at different growth stages for other agronomic crops, but not lowbush blueberries. So Rick stepped up to the plate and provided money for us to be able to follow 3 years in the same fields, in different locations across Nova Scotia. And this had nothing to do with actually applying a foliar nutrient. It was, let's get into the science first and figure out maybe we're not even applying it at the right time.
Yeah, how can we put together a foliar nutritional program if we don't understand the basic nutritional needs of the crop?
Exactly. So we did it on low producing fields, medium producing fields, high producing fields. In the sprout year, we did tissue sampling in June and tip dieback. In the crop, we did it 20% bloom in 2 weeks before harvest. And we found new data, and I presented this data in 2018, and I'm just finding that the industry is not utilizing this data to their advantage. So let's take a look at it. So with nitrogen, because we only have half an hour, with total nitrogen, we found that we were on the low end of optimum in sprout year. We drop down by July outside of optimum. We increase at 20% bloom, and then we really decrease by August. So in these two timings, we are not at optimum. So we're reducing our ability to increase yield. And then look at our phosphorus. I was just happy that we started somewhere that was above optimum, but it was a steady decrease right through till July, regardless of what fertility was applied. Fortunately, phosphorus increased at that bloom. So, because phosphorus, just as much as boron, is essential for healthy pollen tubes and pollination. So that was good. But then again, it was a straight decrease until the crop.
And this is critical. When you think of phosphorus, think of the energy of the plant. Phosphorus drives the energy within the crop, whether it's the energy to get those laterals to develop properly, the energy to get that crop to spread out over the field so you've got a good fill over your field, because that's what's going to give you your yield, is getting that crop to fill in properly. Phosphorus is critical to all of that.
Potassium, we started off in the sprout year in a good amount, but by the time we get to tip dieback, we were below optimum. So your blueberry plants are going into the winter not in the shape they should be. And then we just had a little bit of in May at 20% bloom, and we dropped. So our potassium levels are not getting enough into our crop.
Nope. And if we can get that up later in the season, in the sprout year, that's going to help us over winter much nicer. We're going to see less winter kill. And in the cropping year, that's going to help us get better color and more uniform ripeness throughout the field, so that those berries are coming blue and ripe and ready to pick at a more uniform timing.
I found the boron interesting because the boron shot up by tip dieback. In most of our tissue tests at tip dieback, we have really high levels of bloom boron, and we're seeing that in the sap test. But look what's happening. We crash at bloom stage when boron is so essential to healthy flowers and pollination and all those things. So we are crashing at that important part. So we need to find a way to get boron into the plant at crop year early in the spring.
That is that peak demand window for boron, and that's why it's crashing. We're not meeting the peak demand window to optimize fruit set.
And here's a couple of nutrients that we are very deficient in, which is zinc and iron. I have seen farmers increase their soil zinc levels by using mez, but we're still not getting into optimum. We're never getting into optimum. Look how we're below. And the same with iron. We have very high levels of iron in our soils, but it doesn't get into our crop when it's cold and wet. But you can also see even when it's hot, it's not getting into our crop. So we're having an issue with the availability of all that iron in there. And here's another one, molybdenum. We don't even test for molybdenum. And it wasn't until we did SAP that we saw how low we were to optimum to molybdenum. We need molybdenum in our crops. And it's not just blueberries. We see the non-existent molybdenum in many other agronomic crops that we grow. This is a problem in Atlantic Canada soils.
Well, and I can't get over that. A lot of soil sampling companies, analytical companies, aren't testing for moly. Molybdenum is one of the essential nutrients for plant growth, and to not even look for it. And it's a nutrient I often see as deficient. And if you want your nitrogen to work properly, you need moly.
That's right. Calcium, blueberry fields have low calcium because of our low pH, but we do pretty good, except for, again, when we need a lot of calcium output during that blooming stage. So we need to get some calcium into our blueberry plants in the crop year in the spring.
And the reason that's the peak window, and so that's the peak demand window that we need to focus on, because that's the opportunity to get calcium into the fruit. After that, we're not getting calcium into the fruit anymore. And that's why the demand is easier to meet, and the the numbers improve dramatically. But it's at that time when it's the time to get it into the fruit so we can get better fruit quality, that's when we're dropping below.
So these are the red slides. These are our problems. We talked about manganese. We have naturally high manganese in our soils. And this is where we want it, but this is where we are. We have excessive manganese in our blueberry plants, which is causing a lot of stress in our plants, and we need to address this.
And that is why your zinc and manganese, or zinc and iron, particularly the iron, are so low. High manganese will prevent and compete against the iron and the zinc for plant uptake, and particularly that iron. So that really high manganese that you're bringing in is inhibiting the plant from, preventing the plant from tapping into all that iron you have. The manganese is winning out and the iron isn't coming in.
So do not put manganese fertilizers on your blueberry plants. Aluminum, we talked about that's a big problem in our blueberries. Look at the levels. We don't want it above this red line, and we are very high. We have high levels of aluminum. We're tying up so many of our good nutrients, and we have too much in our plant.
Well,
Too much of anything.
and we're preventing root development, and we're preventing that crop from getting good filling in a field because we're pruning roots with aluminum.
And chlorides, we're going to talk a little bit about that shortly. We have high levels of chloride, especially right here when we're putting on our blueberry fertilizer that is mostly made with MOP. So we're going to talk about that in a bit. Our EC is well below where it should be, which is electrical conductivity. When our EC is low, it also means that the blueberry plants are not doing very good at being able to draw up water and nutrients, especially during dry conditions. And our soil pH, our sap pH is at 3. This is at a very low critical level. Rick?
Yeah, but when that pH is that low, that speaks to the imbalance between particularly calcium, magnesium, and potassium. So those nutrients are so out of balance, they're driving the sap pH down through the floor. If we can get the calcium, potassium, magnesium ratios improved, because remember, it's all about balances, that pH is going to come up nicely. But at those low pHs, that's telling us that those key nutrients are really out of balance right now.
Okay, so we had all that information. It was exciting. It was revolutionary. So then what? Do we do? So what we did is we developed a crop and sprout fertility program based on that SAP research. On a small plot, replicate it. Can we move the needle from here to here? So that's what we started this summer.
What I like about this slide is, and as you're looking at all these slides, take note to the pictures that Lisa's put into these slides. This is the actual research we're talking about going on in the field. These are fields that you might even recognize. Some of you, this might be your field that Lisa's working in. So the pictures that Lisa selected are pictures of these research projects actually taking place in the field.
Well, that's me right there. So we've got 1 year in. We did it on 2 fields, the M field and the S field. And through good luck, they have very different soil tests. So that gave us some additional information, not on purpose, just happened to be great luck. We developed a foliar program, applied at 3 crop stages. So we applied a blend of the iron DL and the zinc DL at 1 liter per acre each, and the 924-3 at 2 liters per acre each. So they were blended and applied at 3 crop stages, which was late June at the early vegetative stage, early August at tip dieback, and early September when it was still actively green.
On the sprout year. I know it's obvious by the stages you described. This is the sprout year.
The sprout year. So we're going to be moving into the same fields in the crop year. We'll talk about that shortly. So the soil sampling, we did soil sampling, and both fields acted differently on their nutrient uptake. And we can see here that the M field is a much better, has a much better soil analysis than the S field. It has 4.8 pH, right in that good zone for mycorrhizae, versus a 4.3. It has higher organic matter at 12%. This is going to be key. The P2O5 is 161 versus 44, which I would really call non-existent. I'd still call this low, but it's much better than this one. The potassium, quite different at 248 versus 101. And the calcium, 905 versus 134. So starting out, this M field was in much better shape than the S field. And then we looked at the zinc and iron. Here's what I mean by high. A high level is over 100. The M field has 285 and the S field has 352. And you're going to see we still aren't getting it into the leaf. The zinc is higher in the M field at 649, which is a good level, and the S field at 3.2. Let's look at these two bad boys. The aluminum is over 1,000. Like that is really high. So we have low pH and so much aluminum in our fields that is tying up that phosphorus and pruning our roots.
Yep, that aluminum is readily available.
And the manganese, a good level is 10 to 20. The M field has 109 and the S field has 39. So let's just keep in mind as we go through this. We sampled 4 times throughout the year. We started in June 26th, we sampled, then we sprayed. Then we sampled in August, and then we sprayed. We sampled in September, then we sprayed, and we did a final sampling on the 16th. We also did tissue sampling at the traditional tip dieback stage. So let's look at some of the results. The nitrogen. So keep in mind, we applied nitrogen 3 times and they're still below optimum levels. The red line, as we're going to see, the red line is the line of the 2016 to the 2018. So it doesn't finish because I don't have the crop year line yet. The blue line is the M field, the good field. The orange line is the S field. So you can see here, even on the nitrogen, it's a better field, higher organic matter. It has more nitrogen in there than the S field, but we're not above optimum. And some of that could be attributed to the low molybdenum. We also have very low molybdenum. And you can see here, we're even lower than when we did the big 2016 to 2018 project. We even came in much lower. Over here, we actually hit in August 0. And as Rick mentioned, molybdenum is essential for that utilization of nitrogen within that crop. So what we're recommending is looking at increasing the 924-3 application rate and adding moly foliar to all the application rates to get that up into the plant. And so next year we're doing crop, but then we're still staying in the field. And the third year, we're going to go back to sprout and we're going to do all these recommendations to see if we're going to move the needle then. Phosphorus. The 924-3 increased the sap phosphorus at tip dieback in early September in the M field only. Remember, the M field was 161 versus the 44 of the S field. We actually saw the phosphorus in the optimum. That's the first time I've seen that. While here we started a little higher, it dropped, it stayed dropped. It kind of crossed the line a bit by September, but then we dropped again. So going into the winter, going into the spring, it's low, while our higher field is higher.
And this is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No,
Lisa.
you go ahead, Rick.
I was going to say, this is a perfect illustration. And I'm work for a foliar nutritional based company. And I've always said foliar nutrition cannot replace root nutrition, whether it's through fertigation or granular fertilizer. Your base macro and secondary nutrients need to come in through the roots first and foremost. And then we use foliar nutrition to take advantage of those windows of opportunity to optimize the yield, optimize the crop health, optimize plant development. But we need that base. And you look here, the foliar nutrition kept you really in the sweet spot of the optimum when we had phosphorus in the soil to work with. Foliar nutrition in the sample where we had virtually no phosphorus to work with fell short. And it wasn't the product. It was the fact that we didn't have that base of phosphorus in the soil to work with. You need to be fertilizing the ground first before you fertilize the leaf, or it's not going to work. You're going to have a train wreck. The question isn't if, it's a question of when.
Exactly. And here again, here was aluminum levels of those 2 fields, even higher than our big project. Look how much there is in there. that got up into the plant. Significant. So you can see this, the S field struggling even more. High crop stress. So the recommendation is you got to increase your soil phosphorus levels, and we're looking at increasing that 924-3. I think that 2 liter per acre rate that's typically used on other types of crops with a different leaf is not high enough. The other thing that's really neat, and I'm only going to tell you one thing because I've got really cool information on gypsum later, is that gypsum applications can help reduce that aluminum uptake because it provides competing calcium against that aluminum. And there's research in PEI that has shown that applying gypsum increases yields. Now, PEI farmers know that. They apply a lot of gypsum, but I don't find there are many farmers in Nova Scotia or New Brunswick that apply gypsum, and we need to start looking at incorporating gypsum in our program to drive that aluminum off. And what about the potassium? We saw the same thing. Here's the M field at 248 versus 101. We still didn't have enough potassium, but the field that had the higher soil potassium with the foliar improved better than the lower application rate. So same thing, soil K levels need to be at optimum for maximum utilization. And I'm seeing so many farmers cutting back on their granular fertilizer and just strictly going with foliar. And as Rick said, it is a train wreck waiting to happen. So I'm going to skip along here. Zinc, I am very excited about this because I've been recommending zinc, but is it really getting in the plant? Oh my goodness, is it ever? This is the first time we've ever been able to see zinc hitting the optimum range. Look at them. We applied it, it just shot right up. I think we need more in the early spring, but here the blue is the treatment. This is the control. Significant difference of the treatment and the control, and even in the tissue. So here, if I just seen the tissue, I would be thinking, is the zinc sitting on that surface? But I know it's not, because look at the difference between the control and the zinc. So the zinc DL is significantly increasing SAP, which we really need, but I think we need to go with a higher application rate early in the spring.
Yep.
Okay. Iron. Again, we're increasing it with the foliar, but not enough to optimum. Now the tissue level looks like we've got plenty, but the SAP level really shows us that we actually don't. But we know we're getting in the right direction. So we're going to look at increasing that application rate.
Yep. And every time you see DL, like a zinc DL or an iron DL, those are simple sugar products that Agro-K manufactures. So it's basically an iron in a simple sugar form. The zinc DL was a zinc in a simple sugar form. And those simple sugars are designed for rapid foliar uptake and rapid utilization by the crop without requiring a lot of energy to be spent by the crop.
Now, okay, we got 10 minutes. So let's talk about the challenges. We talked already about manganese, the issues that we're having. And so high levels of manganese reduces iron, molybdenum, magnesium, copper. We continue to see excessive levels. And not only do they reduce nutrient uptake, they require your plant to have more potassium than they otherwise would require. So even if you put enough potassium on, because of our manganese in our soils, we need even more potassium.
In
It's a
other crops, we'll
significant
actually,
challenge.
yeah, in other crops, we'll actually put on manganese to discourage the uptake of potassium. You've got so much manganese discouraging the uptake of the K that's even there. By golly, it just creates a bigger uphill battle. Don't apply any more manganese.
No. Now, chlorides, we have excessive levels of chlorides. Chloride is important in small amounts, but not excessive. If we have excessive levels, it reduces the plant's ability to move moisture from the soil into the crop, and you know we're having more issues with that. It reduces fruit quality and yield, so when you get it out of the freezer, it's soft and mushy. Again, reduces P uptake, and we need P so bad. So the recommendation is we need to move away from only using MOP. MOP, which is your 0060 that we mix in with a blend, has 47% chlorides. It is our cheapest source of potassium. I get that, but we have 47% chlorides. So at least we should be moving towards blending in some sulfate of potash, which has 0% chlorides, or K-mag, which only has 2.5% chlorides. You know, I know that you wouldn't want to use all SOP yet because they're more expensive, but we should start blending it and stop using 100% of MOP in our blends. And we could use magnesium, so the K-mag would be a really good blend, part of your blend. So let's start looking at that. And aluminum, we've already talked about that. It's through the roof. It reduces so many things. Now, I just want to mention about the gypsum. Applying gypsum will help us against the aluminum challenge by providing calcium, because gypsum is calcium and sulfur. We need both things. And PI Maine research indicated that applying gypsum increases yields. And I dug back to my 2013 presentation to blueberry farmers where I talked about that. We didn't know why, but the research in the late 80s, the theory from these different researchers said that they thought gypsum increased root development, improved pea uptake, and increased microbial activity. Well, guess what? Now that we've done the SAT research, we actually support their theory, which I thought, I got shivers right now. It's great as new tools come out that we either prove or disprove theories that we thought was happening. I do. I have shivers. It's exciting stuff. And I'm looking at faces looking back at me, and you're not really getting how exciting that is. We talked about the pH, and it's an imbalance of your cation nutrients. Again, we're out of balance. And when we get out of balance, not only is a low pH a problem, but your plants are very susceptible to fungal disease, which is just more money.
And aluminum is playing a huge role in that imbalance because it's putting in competition with the other calcium, potassium that we want in there. It's creating that imbalance. We got to get the aluminum down. Gypsum, gypsum, gypsum.
Gypsum, gypsum, gypsum. So in 2020, this is our plan. We're going to go back in those fields and we're going to do a Cal-Bor Molly blend. I'm not sure if that's going to be enough Molly, but Rick tells me probably in the next few months there will be a Molly approved through CFIA, hoping. So we're going to do a Cal-Bor Molly at early bloom, mid bloom, and post bloom. We're going to do the iron and the zinc. So I'm hoping to get that calcium, that boron, that Molly that is crashed at that time. And we'll also be sap sampling during early bloom, mid bloom, post bloom, and we'll go in and sap sample 2 weeks before harvest to see if we're actually getting it in there and if we're moving that needle. So this is really exciting research. It's research that's proving data, proving products. And if there are products that we're going to apply to blueberries that really don't work, save your money and put it on something that does work. Just the fact that it makes you feel good, that you think it's working, but we've proven it isn't, I've got a better place for you to put money. You could hire me to do crop nutrient management planning.
Lise, the most expensive fertilizer is not the one that costs the most. The most expensive fertilizer is the one that didn't work.
Exactly. Okay. So we're doing pretty good. I just want to give you an update on the compost project. A couple years ago, I gave a presentation that we were going to do a compost project on agricultural fields for 5 years, and that we were going to include blueberry fields. So we have, and we're applying the compost here when the ground just gets frozen, because we don't want to put tire tracks, but you can see here the compost is working. So that's the heat of the compost that you're putting on those blueberry fields. And the data so far is exciting. And actually, as I said to Rick, this is a nice finish to what we talked to you about, because some of the issues that we talked to you about that is in all our blueberry fields, the compost is addressing those. So compost will improve soil condition like drainage, water holding capacity. You know what our blueberry soils look like. Water runs right through them. Breakdown of that wood trash. It's sustainable nutrients. Compost is a fertilizer. Compost feeds and stimulates that microbial activity for a healthier soil environment. It reduces your reliance on fertilizers. There's a lot of phosphorus in there, so that will help us with the spread, and a lot of organic matter. The organic matter is what is going to help your fields be more resilient. And we also were able to attain a letter of assurance from Canada Gap on there. So 1 ton of compost will give you 31 pounds of nitrogen, but only 20% is available the first year, so don't panic. 20 pounds of phosphorus, 11 pounds of potash, 53 pounds of calcium. This is an average. 11 pounds of magnesium, 4.5 pounds of sulfur, and trace nutrients, plus your organic matter. So it's like a, it's a multivitamin, let's say, for your soil. So a ton of compost, if you were to buy fertilizer to replace what it's putting in there, is worth about $95 to $125 a ton. And usually it's sold for about 10 bucks a ton. So a huge return on your dollar. The application rates that we applied, this is pre-application, is we're doing 10 ton to the acre every year of immature compost, 10 ton to the acre every year of mature compost, because in agriculture, I think we want immature because it's more active. You got more good bugs going. We don't want it to be as mature. And so it's 10 ton every year for 5 years. We're following it, or 1 time 30 ton to the acre. And that's what it looks like on your blueberry fields in the fall, in the late fall. So what are the results to date? Well, we'll talk about 3 soil nutrients. For phosphorus, which is what we're desperate for in blueberries, the compost, here's the control, just your regular farmer fertilizer. There's your phosphorus levels. Here's our compost. And actually, we're testing for higher phosphorus in our 10 ton of the acre than our 30, which doesn't make any sense, but we're thinking there's a lot of microbial activity happening there.
What's happening, Lise, is you're tapping into that phosphate that's already in the ground, tied up with the high aluminum by driving microbial activity.
And there's so much calcium in the, I don't have it in here, but there's a lot of calcium in the compost. So it's working like a gypsum. It's driving out some of that aluminum. Mm-hmm. The potassium levels. Here's the control. We have significantly increased the potassium levels in the compost fields. Oh yeah, here's the calcium. We've increased the calcium, so it's working like the gypsum. So calcium increased in all compost treatments, and blueberry fields have low calcium. And what about some of these soil health things, organic matter? So there's your control. You're never going to increase organic matter by doing nothing. The compost increased the organic matter in all treatments and was able to hold water during these dry seasons, because we're also testing for that. And the cation exchange capacity, that is the ability of your soils to hold on to those nutrients. Well, the more organic matter you have, the more binding sites you have to hold on to those nutrients that you do apply, and it's feeding those microbes. So you're having great nutrient cycling. And look at this, immature 10, look at that cation exchange capacity compared to your traditional what we're doing now. I mean, significantly increases the ability to hold on to those nutrients and feed your blueberry crops. It's exciting. And we also tested for the microbes and are we having effects? So we buried underwear in these blueberry fields. So how does that work? Microbes like to eat carbon, and these white underwear have a lot of carbon. So you bury it and you dig it up 6 weeks later, and the more eaten up it is, the more microbial activity you have. So here you have the immature compost at 10 ton, the mature compost at 10 ton, the mature compost 30, because I think we have too much of a good thing at the beginning. You can have too much of a good thing. And your control. Look at these compared to your control. You don't have a lot of microbe activity. Look, you could probably still put your legs through those holes. But here, you've just got a thong. That means we have increased the microbial activity, the health, the mycorrhizae, the ability for the nutrient cycling. You have a much healthier blueberry field here. So that is exciting. But we're not only doing that, we're also actually sending the test results out to Quebec so that we have counts, pathogen counts, fungal counts, bacteria counts, so that we have, research data, not just watching underwear. Exciting. And we also did the tissue analysis. And of course, the nitrogen levels were higher with the compost. Control was the lowest. Phosphorus levels were highest in the compost. Control was the lowest because you're not putting enough phosphorus fertilizer down as you are with your compost. So you're putting a lot more phosphorus down with the compost, but you're also doing all the other release things, shoving off the aluminum and all those things. And of course, the potassium levels were higher. And we also seen increased blueberry plant growth were observed in all the compost treatments. Two other add-ons we decided to add because I had extra loads of compost. So we brought it to the farm and we did a 30 ton per acre application rate on a new cleared land because there's a lot of carbon on new cleared land and that has to all be broken down. So we're taking observations, and if it's successful and we get it broken down and we get those plants growing and moving faster, we can reduce the time required from clearing a field to blueberry production. And the second one is these bare spots. So this year's going to be the first year. I got a load sitting out there. We are going to apply compost, yes, by hand, in these bare areas. I know some farmers have been using sawdust or peat moss, but I feel like compost is going to do a much better job because you're also fertilizing it, you're improving the microbial, you're not putting a whole bunch of this carbon down. So what we're going to do is we're going to stake off the outside and we're going to measure growth over time.
And
So we're
and
really
that's
excited.
and that's one of your key windows to higher yields right there, Elise. If percent coverage of a field, it's interesting when you fly a drone over a field that you think you're doing pretty good at, you start looking at all those bare spots that you really can only see from the air. That's one of the major limiting factors in Lowbush blueberry production. If we can get those bare spots to fill in, yields will automatically go up dramatically.
Exactly. Now, I'll give you the negative part of using compost. I'm working with the compost facilities so because they don't understand agriculture and that we need a lot in a short period of time, but also about making sure that it's dry and it's screened well because we don't want little plastics all over our field. And not all compost facilities are created equal. You have really good compost facilities that make beautiful compost, and then we have facilities that do a bad job. So I'm working with those facilities to try to bring them along to make them understand the importance of good clean compost is in there. So I think with what I'm seeing, and we're going to continue on for the next several years, I see compost having a significant impact on blueberry production and then topping it up with foliars at those times that we're dropping the needle in order to start producing those high yields consistently. Can I say that for sure yet? No, but that's why we're constantly year after year keep asking the questions, looking at the data, and moving forward to what do we have to do next. But I just want to reiterate, we've got lots of great data, but not enough farmers are implementing this. They're staying with the same old, same old. Well, you know what? If you stay with the same old, you're going to have the same old. So to finish it up, the industry needs to make changes when we get new scientific information. And by that, I mean research background. You have to expand your toolbox. Cash croppers like corn and soybeans and all that, they get it. They get that they have to look at it in multiple ways. So they're adding wood ash, they're adding compost, they're adding, well, biosolids, you can't use that. They're adding gypsum, they're adding fertilizer, they're adding all kinds of things, and their soil health is coming through the roof and they're doubling their yields. They know that they have to expand their toolbox, and it's not the same toolbox for every field. And foilers are another tool to address those short term needs while you work towards improving that soil health and applying it when it needs it. And these foilers can easily be tank mixed with your products. but you want to buy the right foiler for the right time. And as climate changes, soils are continuing to be out of balance, and taking shortcuts are going to lead to lower yields. 30 to 50% of your crop yields can be attributed to fertility. It's a foundation, but it's not the only answer. And I say this all the time, but you can't save your way to high profits. It's never going to happen. Your program should be driving your yields to reduce your cost of production. And industry is too small for us not to all be working together and sharing ideas and research. This is what I love about working with Truro Agrimart and working with people like Rick. When you start putting in your pieces and then you start talking about it, that's when you have the aha moment. Someone makes a connection and says, what about this? Well, I really think that we should be having a working group of farmers, researchers, and we're not just talking about just academia researchers, we're also talking about on the ground researchers. And we can't be treating companies, say like an Agro-K or whatever, as, oh, they're just trying to sell us stuff. There are differences between companies out there. We get approached by a lot of companies. They want us to promote their products. I won't promote any product until I've seen the proof is in the pudding, because we spent 30 years to get trust with our farmers. We are not going to promote a product until we see that it works, and not only works because it's well enough that it works, but do you get a return on your dollar? If you don't, doesn't really matter if it works, does it? You need to make money. So there are companies, great companies out there like Agro-K, that will put money into local research, into the blueberry industry, to see where the issues are and how we can change it. Then we have companies that are just interested in giving you a pretty brochure and selling you product and making you feel good. You have to make decisions separate from that. And so I think we're shrinking that knowledge gap. And if we just walk away after this presentation tonight and we don't get together and try things, but we try things based on following where the research is, it's going to be a slow process to get us to these higher yields that we're looking for to reduce our input costs.
Lise, you've summed it up well. We need to remember that proper crop nutrition and soil health have a direct return on investment. Quite often dramatic return on investment, but you have to start by making that investment. And at Agro-K, we like to have the science drive us to what we need to do so that that return on investment is real. We're not guessing. I don't want to guess. When we bring a program out to the farm, we want to show you the science and why we're recommending what we're recommending when we're recommending it. And that's what we're doing here now. We're starting to show you the science that we've been working on for 4, 5, 6 years now, that we've invested in to give you guidance on how to get a return on investment by managing your fertility and your soil health.
And I don't give Rick the answer he's looking for. If something doesn't work, we want to know it doesn't work, and we want to know why.
Right. That's right.
So, are there any questions? Are you excited? I'm excited because we know more than we ever did. We know how to do things better, and we're going to learn even more. So, are there any questions?
So we have a question on the chat here, Elise.
Okay.
I'll read out loud. So are you saying SAP testing with soil samples should be done before choosing fertility plans? Do you want me to take that one, Lisa, or do you want to?
You take that, and then I'll see if I have anything to say.
What I'm saying first and foremost is the soil sample should be done every 3 to 5 years is the general rule of thumb. So an up-to-date soil sample is foundation number one. We are utilizing the SAP analysis in season to give us guidance as we go through the season and make changes to the program that we're planning to do. But certainly the soil sample is first and foremost. That's what we base the fertility program on. So we do the soil sample in the early fall or early spring when we can get in there, usually in the early fall. We develop a fertility plan based on that soil sample, and then we come in season and do some some SAP analysis work at those key windows of opportunity. It's a check to see how the program is working, if it is working, and how we may be able to fine tune it in season to make necessary changes to optimize that fertility program and be efficient on our fertilizer budget.
Yeah, I totally agree with Rick. And, to get your feet wet, first of all, like Rick said, make sure you have soil tests.
Mhm.
But I think on a small scale to get your feet wet, why not sample at these opportune times that we've shown that we're below and do some sampling of a field that's your better field and looks better versus a field that doesn't, so that you can compare the soil test between the two, compare your SAT between the two, and see where you need to make adjustments.
And if you are interested in doing SAP analysis, this is where I get to throw Terry and Megan under the bus. They certainly can help you get that done. You just need to reach out to one of those two, and they'll help make sure you get the SAP analysis work done. And as far as understanding those results when they come back, that's what Lise, Terry, Megan, and I here as a team are to help you understand them. And my goal isn't just to explain the test result to you. I want you to understand how to read these test results so you know what you're looking at. Next question. Is there a resource available that gives us a guideline of what a healthy blueberry soil looks like, i.e. the various nutrient benchmarks or bookends, or what we should be aiming for? Lise, soil?
Yes, I do have soil benchmarks for every one of those nutrients. I'm hoping over time with SAP testing that I confirm that or change those. But currently, right now, based on the information we have so far, I would say you would be looking at a phosphorus level P2O5. Now remember, it's different in different labs. So for instance, if you're from New Brunswick or PEI, most New Brunswickers send it to PEI. You have P2O5 parts per million. Nova Scotia has P2O5 kilograms per hectare. So I would say we should be looking around 250 kilograms per hectare of P2O5, which is still low. I tell other crops they should be around 350, but I think if we could get to 250, that would be 125 for those of you in New Brunswick and PEI as a start. For potassium, now I've usually been saying a similar number, about 250, but now that I've been seeing SAP that we're still too low, I'm probably thinking 300, or for New Brunswick and PEI, that would be 150. If any of you guys are from other provinces, you may have phosphorus and potassium, not P25 or K2O. You might be in parts per million. You might be Bray versus Malik. Just send me an email with what you got, and I have no problem in sending you what I think of your soil test. Reach out to me. See my email at the top?
Excellent. Good questions. Any others? Certainly feel free to type into the chat box if you, or just speak up if you're comfortable doing that. We'll just give a few
Shy
more
bunch.
minutes.
While they're generating a few more questions, Rick and Lise, certainly want to thank you guys for your presentation. And over and above the abundance of knowledge you've given us tonight, Agro-K has also given us 3 gift certificates to hand out to 3 worthy listeners. They're all worthy listeners, but 3 particular that had their names luckily drawn. One's Lawson Purdy, second one's Louis Babineau, and the third is David Arnberg. Those are $75 gift certificates.
Oh, congratulations.
So nice little bonus for learning a lot and being part of our group tonight.
They are recording this, so they're putting it on YouTube if you want any information.
And certainly we covered a lot of ground tonight, and we covered it fast. It was a little bit of a fire hose in the face. If you think of any questions after the fact, please don't be shy in reaching out, either through Lise or Terry and Megan have my contact information. We're both readily available, and encourage questions. That's a big part of the learning process, right? The only bad question is the one not asked. Oh, our new foliar program for, so we did touch base on what the plan was going to be for a sprout field, which is 3 applications of a tank mix combination of zinc DL, iron DL, and 924-3. And then in the fruiting year, we're focusing on Calbor Moly, topset as well, and calcium, and then coming in post pedal fall with some iron. Did I cover it all, Lise? Can you do you have that slide? Can you zip back to that?
Sure can. And just to let you know, on the compost trial, we are going to have a field tour this summer out there. So I hope to see you all out there. And let me get back there.
And Rebecca, as you're going back, Lise, Rebecca has done a great job putting the suggested foliar program. And here's the foliar program for the fruiting year based on what we're seeing so far in the science. And this is what we're going to be really evaluating heavily this year. So early bloom, Calbor Moly, mid bloom, again, a second shot of Calbor Moly, and that's calcium boron moly. It's a very simple name. And then the iron DL post bloom to try to get those iron levels up finally. And if we go back one more slide, we should see the sprout year. Oh, probably.
Oh no, it's way at the front.
Oh, my apologies. Well, you're going back to that. What Rebecca has done is she's put this on a nice one pager where one side is the sprout year program and the second side is the fruiting year program. So Terry and Megan can certainly make sure you get, if you want to see what we're talking about for a program based on the science, we can certainly make sure you get one.
I think, Rick, we need to increase the first application of the iron and the zinc and the 924-3 for that first application because it's too cold and wet.
Yeah, we had talked about that the first application was going to be 2 liters, 2 liters, and 2 liters, and then certainly for the second and third application, back to 1 liter for the iron and the zinc, and I think 3 liters for the 924-3, if I recall.
Perfect.
Rebecca just mentions we have an electronic version of the foliar program that we can send out to everyone who registered for tonight's session. So there you go. You'll have a nice 1-pager, actually 2-pager front and back, that will outline the program that the research is guiding us to.
But don't forget, don't leave out your granular fertilizer program.
That's really critical. And that was the neat part of having the 2 different soil types that we were working with is you got to feed the soil. You got to feed the roots. You can't do it all on a foliar program. It doesn't work. Few more questions before we go. Should your compost have a low pH value? Lise?
Most composts are around 6, which that is not a liming material. We did, I had to leave it off, but I did want to remind everybody, we did a wood ash project out in northern New Brunswick. And so we applied up to 3 tons to the acre, which fed it phosphorus, potassium, zinc, but also I was concerned about driving the pH up too high, and we didn't. And that's a liming product. So I would not be concerned at all about pH on that.
Another question, is there any research like this being done through Maine or in Quebec to compare to? And at this point in time, I'm not aware of any. Agro-K is in Maine, and I would certainly like to be in Quebec. So if there is an opportunity to do some research, and as the Canadian guy, I'm certainly really drawn to Quebec to do some research. So if there's somebody listening tonight who's interested, please reach out to me and we can talk. It's always nice to get further research in different regions to compare, to verify with what we're seeing. So I'm certainly open to that discussion. Accessing compost and delivery, who does this and where?
Okay. Just like I mentioned before, I'm working with the compost facilities to make sure that they're ready for agriculture. There is a facility in every county, and some are better than others. So if you are interested, you can send me an email, and then I can figure out where you are and if you should try to get some compost from that particular facility or not. So I'll flip back down here. And I also know the facilities in PEI, New Brunswick as well.
Wonderful.
And I hope everybody can come out to the field day. Hopefully we'll be all, COVID will be down and we can do a field day barbecue and have a look. You'll see third year application on these sites, and hopefully we'll see something on that new cleared land as well.
And stay tuned as we continue to research on the foliar programs as well. You know, 2020 was year one of analyzing and evaluating actual programs now. 2021 will be the year for the fruiting crop, and then we'll come back in 2022 to reevaluate the sprout year again. So stay tuned for further information. And I certainly hope you've heard something tonight that you can take and use at the farm, and do better. We want you to succeed. Our success is based on your success.
That's right. And every year we're learning more about blueberries, and we want to keep sharing that and hopefully making changes and updating what we're doing in the industry so that we are ready to meet climate change and be able to increase yields, therefore increase profits.
Yep. Yep. Wonderful. Well, I don't see any further questions. We've taken up a lot of your evening. Oh, go ahead.
Lisa, Gary Chapman here.
Hi, Gary.
Hi, how are you? Compost, immature compost versus mature compost. Our landfill site in Cameron County, I would classify it as mature compost.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, I've got it in there in past times. Where might we get some immature compost?
Okay, nowhere yet. I should probably explain that a little bit better. Right now, under the CCME, Canadian Council's Environmental Ministers, the regulations for compost is that it has to be mature, meet foreign content, and meet metal and pathogen content. So right now, you cannot sell immature compost, but because we started working with research with this immature compost, our government is really interested in potentially making a change. And when I say immature compost, it still has to meet pathogens, it still has to meet metals, and it still has to meet foreign matter. The only thing it doesn't have to meet is maturity. So as I'm proving to the Departments of Environment that using immature compost is a good option for agriculture, I think you're going to see that change. Now, the Compost Council of Canada is not happy about that in terms of they don't like me calling it immature compost. So I got to come up with a new word because they've worked so hard on mature compost that there's a certain criteria for it. And you can well imagine that in most of the compost industry, they're putting it in a bag or something. So if it's sitting on the shelf for a year and you open it up, you don't want it to smell. For us in agriculture, we want it to be more alive. We want more nitrogen in there. We want those bugs in there. So they look the same. And it's funny because all the fields we're working on, the farmers can't tell the difference between immature and mature. Theoretically, the immature is supposed to have a bigger smell, but we can't tell the difference. And I told Environment, I said, if smell is the only concern, you know, farmers have manure.
There's your new name, Elisa. It's been suggested that we call it adolescent compost.
So we're not ready yet, but we're getting close.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Question. Very good question. Any last questions? Well, again, if something pops in your mind later, please don't hesitate to reach out to one of us so we can get your questions answered. Thank you, everyone, for your time tonight. I really appreciate it on a Tuesday evening that you take almost an hour and a half of your evening to listen to the Lisa and Rick show. I hope you found value in it and that, like I said, you picked up some tidbits of information, some golden nuggets that you can now apply at the farm to do a little bit better.
Yeah, you don't have to wait. We've got real data that we have confirmed over years of some practices you can do right now. You don't have to wait for another 5 years till we come back again. You can do it now.
Yeah. So don't be shy to ask. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Terry and Megan, we put it back over to you to wrap up and say thank you.
Thank you.
Megan gonna jump back in or?
Can, no worries. I guess everyone said thank you, but a thank you from Churro Agromart as well. We really appreciate the high attendance, the last few sessions in the evening. So thank you and have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Thanks, Rick.
Night.
Really appreciate it.